There is a kind of coming out that no one posts about. The one that happens years after the party, when the confetti's gone and you're left alone with your thoughts. Yes, you're out on paper. Your friends know, your family knows. Your Instagram has at least one photo that says it clearly. But there are still moments that give you away to yourself. The way you lower your voice in a boardroom. The way you stop yourself from holding your partner's hand when you walk past a group of strangers. The smile you put on when someone makes a joke that actually stings. That gap between who you are and what you feel allowed to be has a name. Psychologists call it internalized homophobia. It's what happens when the things we heard about people like us do not just stay outside. They start to live inside our heads and shape how we see ourselves. Today on Wednesdays with Woody, we're talking about that second closet, the one that lives inside, what the research says about it, how it shows up in our bodies, our relationships, and our choices, and what it might look like to loosen its grip.
It's Wednesdays.
Hello, gay straights, the in-betweens, and the quietly questioning, and the allies who wandered in here by accident. Welcome back to yet another episode of Wednesdays with Woody, where we are interrupting your regularly scheduled Wednesday to talk about the bits of being human that do not always fit neatly into a caption. This week, well, we're sitting with internalized homophobia, not in a self-help way that blames you for not being positive enough, but in a real, honest way. What do psychologists mean when they use the term? What has research found about how it affects our mental health? How does it shape who we think is attractive, who we date, who we reject, and how we treat each other inside the community? And as always, this is just a conversation. You bring your story, I bring some language, some research, and my own mess. And we meet somewhere in the middle. Let's start simple. Internalized homophobia is not just, I do not like gay people. Most queer people I know are very clear that homophobia is wrong. They can call it out in a heartbeat when they see it in a law, a sermon, or a headline. What is harder to notice is when some of those beliefs have quietly shaped how you see yourself. It might sound like, I am fine with gay people, but I do not want to be too much. Or, I'm happy for other people to be out, but I should probably keep my life private. Or, I will never have the kind of relationship straight people have, so I shouldn't expect too much. Researchers like Mayer and Dean describe internalized homophobia as what happens when a lesbian, gay, or bi person takes society's negative messages about homosexuality and directs them inward. In other words, the world says there is something wrong with you often enough that a part of you starts to agree, even if you would never say those things out loud. This is not just a theory. A large meta-analysis that looked at more than 30 studies and over 5,000 queer people found a clear link between internalized homophobia and mental health problems like depression and anxiety. Since then, more recent work has said the same thing. The more shame people carry about who they are, the more they struggle. I find it helpful to hold both truths at once. On one hand, internalized homophobia is something that was done to us. We do not wake up one day and decide to feel this way. On the other hand, once we can see it, it becomes something we can work with, gently and slowly, instead of letting it run the whole show from the background. So what does this look like in a normal day? Research often uses big phrases like psychological distress and internalizing symptoms. But let's translate that. Studies show that when people score higher on internalized homophobia scales, they are more likely to report feeling down, anxious, or hopeless. They are more likely to say they feel lonely even when they are not physically alone. Some studies link it to heavier drinking, riskier sex, or staying in situations that are not good for you because deep down, you're not sure you deserve better. But outside of the lab, it can look very ordinary. It is saying yes to work you do not want to do because you feel you have to prove you're grateful to be there. It is laughing off a comment that actually hurts because you do not want to be the sensitive gay one. It is avoiding affection in public because you do not want to trigger a scene, even when the person next to you is someone you love. A more recent study on queer teenagers put it plainly. Internalized homophobia made their self-esteem worse, and that low self-esteem was part of why they were struggling with their mental health. When you believe that something about you is wrong, it changes what you think you deserve in friendships, in romance, in work, and even in joy. If you ever looked back on a period of your life and thought, why did I tolerate that for so long? This might be the answer. It is not that you were weak. It is that you were carrying a story about yourself that said, this is probably the best I can do. Now, let's talk about desire, the messy part, the part we pretend is purely individual and beyond analysis. I just have a type. We say it like it's a neutral fact, not something shaped by the world we grew up in. However, researchers who work with gay and bi men have found that internalized shame is often linked to body dissatisfaction. Surprise, surprise. The more someone has absorbed the idea of being queer makes them less, the more likely they are to feel that their body is not good enough either. Add in ideas about what a real man should look like, and you get a very narrow picture. Tall, masculine, not too feminine, often white, or at least close to it. If you spend any time on dating apps, you will have seen this play out. Profiles that say mask only, jokes about no drama, no camp, and silence about race. And then page after page of the same bodies being praised and the same bodies being ignored. Studies with black, gay, and bi men show how internalized racism and internalized homophobia can overlap, shaping who feels desirable, who feels disposable, and who feels like they have to overperform to be chosen. And then you notice something else. Every now and then, someone breaks through the script entirely. Someone who does not fit neatly into the narrow mold of what desirability is supposed to look like. Someone who's queer, unapologetic, playful with gender, and uninterested in making themselves smaller to be accepted. When figures like this show up in the mainstream, it reveals what the culture is still learning how to hold. Moments like that widen the frame. They remind us that beauty, confidence, and worth have never lived in a single kind of body. They point to all the people who exist outside the usual template and still carry something magnetic, something expressive, something fully themselves. The point of bringing this up is not to critique any one person. It's to notice the pattern. If the world only feels comfortable celebrating certain versions of queerness, then it is worth asking, who is still being left out? Whose softness or flamboyance or gender play is still treated as too much? And when we ask those questions, we're not attacking our own desire. We're simply becoming more aware of the forces that shape it. Internalized homophobia is not only about how straight people see us, it also shows up in how we see each other. And for trans and gender diverse people, that burden is often even heavier. Studies with trans communities show a similar pattern to what we see with internalized homophobia. When people have taken in negative beliefs about being trans, they're more likely to report anxiety, depression, and thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. One study showed that when trans and gender diverse people are treated as fantasies or objects, rather than full human beings, it can deepen their inner shame instead of erasing it or easing it. This is more than just law or policy. It is the way certain identities are still whispered about even in queer spaces. The jokes that punch down, the events that welcome everyone in theory, but feel cold in practice if you are trans, non-binary, fat, disabled, or visibly gender non-conforming. Researchers sometimes use the phrase lateral violence for this. Harm that moves sideways inside a community rather than just from the outside. You can see it in no femmes, no fats, no trans profiles. You can see it when people distance themselves from trans folks or very camp men to be seen as respectable. When we talk about internalized homophobia and transphobia in this way, it is not to say that queer people are the problem. It is to be honest about how deep these messages sink. Even in the spaces we build for ourselves, we sometimes repeat the hierarchies we grew up with. Naming that is part of changing it. There is another layer to all of this, and it sits in the background like a storm. In many countries, support for LGBTQIA+ rights rose for years. Recently, that climb has slowed, and in places like the US and the UK, some polls even show support for same-sex marriage dipping after a long period of steady growth. At the same time, there has been a wave of public arguments about trans rights, about education, about gender-affirming care. The message many queer people receive is mixed. On paper, you are protected. In the news cycle, you are a problem again. Even if you're not reading every poll, your nervous system notices. Maybe you feel a bit more cautious about what you share at work. Maybe you second guess holding your partner's hand in a place where you once felt safe. Maybe you find yourself thinking, I should be grateful for what we have, instead of asking for what you need. Internalized homophobia grows well in that kind of climate. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because it confirms an old fear. See, the world was always going to turn on you. Part of the work here is recognizing that feeling for what it is, a response to pressure, not proof that you do not belong. The story does not end with the problem. The same body of research that names internalized homophobia and transphobia also points towards what helps. Large surveys of LGBTQIA+ people show that feeling connected to a community makes a real difference. People who are more out and who feel part of a queer network tend to report lower levels of internalized stigma and better mental health. Community does not magically erase shame, but it gives you other voices to lean on when your own is hard on you. Guides from organizations like the Trevor Project talk about a few simple steps. Start by naming the harsh inner voice when it shows up. Notice when you're repeating something you were taught rather than something you truly believe. Challenge those automatic thoughts gently, not by forcing yourself to be positive, but by asking, is this actually true, or is this an old fear talking? Research on resilience, including work with trans communities in very difficult environments, shows that people find ways to protect their sense of self. Through friendships, through spirituality, through art, through small daily acts of living as themselves, as much as they safely can. The impact of internalized stigma is real, but it is not fixed. In practice, this might look like seeking out spaces where you do not feel like you're the only one. It might mean talking to a therapist or a counselor who understands queer experiences. It might mean choosing partners and friends who make you feel softer and more yourself than more on guard. It might even be something as simple as letting your laugh stay loud the next time you catch yourself shrinking it. None of this is about a perfect, confident, queer person overnight. It's about giving yourself permission to slowly move from suspicion of self to a little more trust. If you're listening to this and realizing that some of this lives in you, you're not alone. Most of us did not make it through a homophobic world without absorbing something. The point is not to judge that part of you. The point is to notice it with a bit more kindness. You are allowed to want more than survival. You are allowed to want relationships that feel steady, work that does not cost you your whole nervous system, a life where you are not constantly editing yourself to be acceptable. If all you do after this episode is give a name to that small, tight feeling that shows up when you are about to be fully yourself, that is already movement. You do not have to fix it all at once. You just have to remember that the story you were given about yourself is not the only one available. Until next week, Wednesday, I'm sending you gentleness, courage, and a little bit of mischief for the week ahead. Love, light, and happiness. Ciao.